Hey YouTube, welcome back for the conclusion of our Peavey Predator 1990s USA rebuild here. Finished now with my rebuild. I'm going to walk through the last few steps that I did. Of course, as we had the neck off and we were looking at the stamp under there and so forth, something I discovered which eluded me at first, and then I realized that as I was working on the neck, this is actually a two-piece neck, but it is not as typically with Gibson head styles. Any of those that are bent backwards, it's just often associated with Gibson. There is often what's called a scarf joint right here, and so usually a two-piece neck has a lower piece and then it has a head joint somewhere up here. You don't see that as much again on fenders, but sometimes there'll be a joint in the leaf of the head or something like that. So I was looking for that. What I did not realize that this is actually two-piece longwise right there, and I noticed it more pronounced as I took the little guard off there to get to the truss rod, and it was easier to see under here. But I realized that this was actually two, and they're so well jointed that the seam is almost impossible to see. If you catch the light just right, you can see it, but to just look at this, you'd say, well, that's a one-piece neck. What I realized, though, at the same time, is that this has an integrated fingerboard, as in the fretboard is part of the neck. It's not a second piece that's been layered on. And usually when you see that, there is something called a skunk stripe that goes up the back, which is basically a line that they cut in there to put the truss rod in. They call it a skunk joint because for the interest of aesthetics, they often would mate into maple. They would put rosewood or a darker wood there, because to put maple in just makes it look like it was a repair and the grain wasn't caught right and so forth. So they would often put a different color stripe in there. This does not have the skunk stripe, so how did they get the truss rod in there? Well, they had two halves this way, and they must have drilled them out like that and then mated them over the truss rod, would be my guess. But really cool, interesting thing there. And again, they did such a great job that the grain, I mean, you cannot, it really takes a trained eye looking for it to see that this is not a single piece of wood. Very, very well done. A few things that I would say about if you are in the act of reinstalling a neck, be very gentle. This might seem obvious, but it's worth repeating. Be very gentle with the way that you drive these in. Obviously, you're going to have a firm hand turning them in. Do not use a power driver. I will use a power driver to pull them out. I will only use hand power putting them back in. And what I tend to do is corner to corner, corner to corner. You get all of them started so they're starting to bite, corner to corner, and then you tighten them down, 1, 2, 3, 4, corner to corner. And I usually will install them where I'm looking at it up and down like this, where I can see every little crevice. I want to make sure that to the best of my ability I've got all of these joints there nice and flush, and I watch very carefully as those are going in to make sure that it is uniformly pulling and you get a nice finish. And so it's one of those things that you want to take your time with. You don't want to rush, and you want to be, again, firm. You've got to drive them in, but you don't want to strip them. You don't want to strip the screw, and you definitely do not want to strip the neck. That is a bad day for everyone. Moving next to our final remarks about the body and the finish on this vintage guitar here. Now, one thing I failed to mention previously, it's entirely possible that somebody artificially reliced this, as in went at it with a hammer. That's entirely possible. I did not see what happened to this guitar with my eyes, but the reason why I think this is at least predominantly natural relicking is the amount of wear in the right spots. For example, you will often see guitars that have been artificially reliced where your forearm, the plate where your forearm rubs, will be sanded down smooth onto the wood all the way across, and there'll be this huge thing. That can happen primarily, as we'll talk in just a moment, with nitrocellulose finishes, but it takes a lot of strokes, a lot of friction to do that over time, that amount. And so, not to say that there are not guitars out there that are naturally reliced in that way, but often if someone is going to artificially relic, that's the kind of thing that they do. They'll make large sanded spots. This has all sorts of different kinds of nicks that were all sorts of different shapes. There are cuts. A lot of the damage is little nicks on the bottom, which if you are just dropping the guitar into something, boom, like that, or throwing it into a trunk, that sort of thing, that's the kind of damage that you get. And thanks to the strength of this wood, there's no significant damage despite all of those bumps and bruises. But anyway, so we don't know, it might be artificial, but it strikes me as being natural, and regardless, this is what we got, so this is what we're going to do with it. Now, the reason why I have decided to go with the just sanding it down and buffing it down till it's relatively smooth and then filling it in with very thick layer of carnauba wax, the reason I do that is because I believe this is a nitrocellulose finish. Okay, I'm not 100% positive, but the signs that show me that are the yellowing that has occurred in the paint, because you could see under there the white that has not seen the sun, right? You can have what you might say tan marks on this. So I believe that that's a major feature, and just the way that it has been reacting to my buffing and so forth, it does not strike me as polyurethane. You also get these little nitrocellulose being a natural sort of lacquer, one that goes hundreds of years back in how long they've been making it and applying it in instruments. It usually gives you almost like little skin ripples depending on the way that it sits and so forth, and I found a decent amount of those. This guitar isn't old enough to have a lot of wrinkles, but it had some, and that also tells me it's nitrocellulose. Now, if you have a nitrocellulose, nitro as it's often called, finished guitar, you do not want to put polyurethane on it or anything like that, because they're not going to play nice together and you will end up getting a very poor looking finish. It's not going to want to adhere, there's going to be rough edges, and probably is going to end up flaking on you or just not wanting to bond right. So what we have instead are these nice smooth edges, relatively. Again, if you keep taking it down, you're just going to keep losing paint. So I tried to smooth out all of the edges so it's relatively smooth all around. Nothing's flaking off, nothing's fighting your fingers, nothing's biting into them, there's no gremlin teeth on there, right? Relatively smooth. And what you end up getting is a very natural, very cool looking old vintage guitar, and just feels great, looks great. Now, something I haven't done yet, I haven't decided if I'm going to leave this. It had three different with the knobs here, and one of them was white, the other two were black, and I might just leave that because of the value of it being weird. But I haven't decided. I might match them up. It's a super easy thing if I decide to do that. But overall, this body, it feels really great. It handles really well. It's very nicely balanced, and as we've been saying, this thing is very tough and I believe extremely durable as a guitar. When I think of the Peavey, this era of Peaveys, I think of blue jeans and like Carhartt overalls and that sort of thing. That these are not, you know, super refined guitars, but they're durable, they're rugged, they're the kind of thing that you can gig with, you can toss in the back of your hatchback and get on down to the next gig, and it doesn't matter if it gets a little nicked along the way. Just a, you know, cool, tough, rugged sort of old vintage guitar. As a point of comparison, looking at the nitrocellulose versus a polyurethane coated guitar. This here is a Squier Jazzmaster that I recently acquired. Love this beautiful color, and I'll be doing a video on it once I've had it long enough to really get into it. But this suffered some shipping damage, and it was dropped at some point, and a rather large chunk right there broke off and shattered and so forth. And I'm still in process of repairing this, but it's a very different method, and it's already been the first stages have been done here, but initially this paint was broken, like you could see under it, and it was separating from the guitar around it. Very fast, thick coats of polyurethane will adhere to wood, but they don't sink into it in the same way. And what you end up getting is when it gets hit, rather than dimple, rather than make a little nick or dent there, or a little crevice that you might start to see the wood under it, just a whole chunk flaked off and broke off into bits, and there's a crack, probably a good solid inch going out either way, and some little hairline cracks even that developed in the area. And again, I don't know how hard this was dropped, but that is how this sort of a coat, this sort of a finish will react to it. It'll shatter, it gets very brittle, and it wants to separate from the guitar. Now, look at the difference with this Peavey, which has been through a lot more drops. See, here's a similar, like, look at that, very similar size and everything, but you see the paint did not break away, it didn't become brittle and flake off. As I sanded it, it just went smooth. You really couldn't do that with the other one. I had to fill it in, press it down, get it to adhere, and then start to fill it in with clear coat polyurethane. But with the nitro, you don't have that. It's much more natural in the way that the wood takes the damage and the paint doesn't just explode off of it. But very different kinds of finish, and so you do not want to mix and match on these. If you have a nitro guitar, you've got to deal with it in a different way than if you have a poly guitar. Alright, we get it. You love the guitar. Okay, but how does it sound? How does it play? Well, this whole time as I've been going through this, the videos are all backed. The music that I did in the background is just me noodling on this guitar. Just a few riffs you'll probably recognize, a few chord progressions you'll probably recognize, but all played on this guitar with my, you might say, period correct USA Peavey amplifier here. It's a Backstage Plus. Good little amplifier, very old school. This guitar has, as you would expect, a lot of versatility coming out of a Stratocaster style guitar with the 3 pickups. You can do good little rhythm work with it. Plays great. You get wonderful, very mellow, clean tones. Now, I play typically more blues and that sort of thing, so all the frets ring true, plays very easily. I've got the action set very low. There's no buzz or noise coming from it. Can play excellent punchy lows and highs. Just a wonderful playing guitar. Now, I don't typically play heavier stuff myself, but it will handle it no problem. You can crank it up. There it is. You can handle the hard stuff as well. Just a great guitar, one that when I'm really thinking about the value and quality of a guitar, there is an intangible quality that just makes you want to play it. You just want to pick it up. You just want to hold it. You just want to noodle on it while you're watching TV. And this guitar has that vibe in high quantity. It's the kind of guitar you just enjoy sitting with, enjoy feeling. It is a fantastic guitar, and considering that I bought this guitar for the price point of an entry-level Squire, I mean, come on, people. Fantastic value. This is a real gem, and if you're looking at one out there, I highly recommend you get it. It's a great platform to get into, easy to work on, tough, durable. As we've seen, this thing has got some really well done, very tough wood, very well put together. It can handle it. It can handle the gigging. It can handle the falls and the scrapes and the bruises. It doesn't care. It just keeps playing, and it's got great classic vintage tone. So if you're looking for a vintage USA made instrument and you're not looking to spend a huge amount of money, I highly recommend seeking one of these out and going through your own process of making it yours.